My name is Tim Boyd. I'm the president of Drug Screens Plus. We are a third-party administrator, often referred to as a consortium for drug and alcohol testing programs, and we provide a variety of drug and alcohol testing services. We have 30 years experience as a consortium TPA. We have both regulated and non-regulated clients. Our clients are not bound by geography. We have specific collection site relationships. Example of a few of them are like Marquette General Hospital and War Memorial. We're the TPA for all their DOT drug testing. And we also have DOT and state police recommendations. So I know who I'm speaking to. How many people are required to follow DOT regulations for drug and alcohol testing? Okay, so it's kind of a 50-50 split. The majority of our clients are regulated by the DOT and the federal guidelines. Many companies have employees that don't fall under the federal regulations as far as being covered, but they also want to test all of their employees, so that's done under their company authority. The 6 DOT agencies are Federal Motor Carrier, FTA, FAA, FRA, Pipeline, and Coast Guard. Although the Coast Guard falls under Homeland Security these days, they still follow DOT Part 40 regulations for drug testing. Federal regulations, as far as the Federal Motor Carrier is concerned, requires persons holding a commercial driver's license and who operate a commercial motor vehicle to be tested for controlled substances and alcohol. These rules apply to both interstate and intrastate drivers. Who needs a CDL in Michigan? Anybody that operates a Class A vehicle or Class B vehicle or Class C that carries more than 16 people, and it either has to be placard for hazmat. Definition of commercial motor vehicles defined differently in all the regulations, but for Part 382, which concerns drug and alcohol testing, it defines CMV as those vehicles that require a CDL to operate, which it states again there. And for the drug and alcohol testing purposes, commercial motor vehicle is a vehicle that with a gross vehicle weight rating of 26,001 pounds or more, a vehicle designed to carry 16 or more passengers, and a vehicle that's required to have a hazmat placard. And the 26,001 pound vehicle is based off of the placard that's on your trucks, the gross vehicle weight rating. Even if you don't carry 26,001 pounds or more, it depends on what the gross vehicle weight rating is. There's 6 reasons for testing. I'm just going to quickly go through each one of them. Pre-employment first. Anybody that employs a driver, and by driver I mean the technical term is anybody that performs a safety-sensitive function according to the FMCSA. That could be a mechanic that occasionally fixes a vehicle but then takes it out on a public roadway to test drive it. They would fall into a safety-sensitive function. Every employer is required to have a negative pre-employment before the driver is allowed to drive for the first time. You're allowed to do alcohol testing on pre-employment, but if you do, make sure you do it on everyone and not just pick certain people that you think have a problem or an issue with it. There is one exception for the negative pre-employment, and that's if the employee was in a random drug testing program previously in the previous 30 days, and they were either tested within the last 6 months or they were in the random selections for the past year. When you do a negative pre-employment drug test, that is only good for 30 days. So if you would have to get that person into a random pool within that 30 days of the negative test. Post-accident testing. Each surviving driver must be tested for drugs and alcohol if the accident involved a human life. And also, If it did not involve human, if there were no fatalities, the only other times you would have to do the test is if the driver received a citation and either the accident involved bodily injury that required medical treatment, or there was one or more of the vehicles incurred disabling damage. Here's a little diagram of, first ask if the accident involved human life. Yes, you have to test. No, did they receive a citation? No, then no test. If yes, then medical treatment or towable. The alcohol test must be performed within 8 hours of the accident. If the test isn't conducted within 2 hours, the employer must document why they couldn't get the test done promptly. The drug test must be performed within 32 hours of the accident. And no alcohol or drug test should be done in lieu of medical attention that the driver may need. Reasonable suspicion testing can only be conducted when a trained supervisor observes behavior that indicates drug or alcohol use. This behavior includes the employee's appearance, speech, breath, or body odors. Each employer must have a person who is a supervisor that is trained in reasonable suspicion. And if you do have a reasonable suspicion test, do not just tell the driver to go get tested. You must take them there. Otherwise, you could be setting yourself up for some severe liability. A return to duty test is a negative test result that has to be conducted after employee has a violation and they have gone through the return to duty test regulations, which includes the SAP and some education and training there. Oh, and return to duty tests are always observed by someone of the same gender. Follow-up testing goes hand in hand with return to duty. Once the employee completes the return to duty test, they're subject to at the minimum 6 follow-up tests over the next 12 months. Those would be unannounced, sort of like a random test, and those are also observed. And it's at the direction of the SAP, the substance abuse professional, that they can require follow-up testing for up to 5 years. If you have anyone that is going through the follow-up program, make sure you look at whatever the SAP recommends, and if it looks odd to you, question it. We actually had a person who was coming in 5 to 6 times a month to our place, and by month 2, we were like, hey, this guy, he must have a real problem or something screwed up. And we talked to our client about it, and actually the SAP worded the testing wrong, and it was supposed to be 6 tests within the next 12 months, and they put 6 tests every month. So random testing. The selection is made by a scientifically valid method. Each driver has an equal chance of being selected every time. Each driver, once notified, must head to the collection site immediately. There is no time limit on how long you have to complete your random testing. The regulations just say they must be done immediately. They don't give, you got to do it in 2 hours or 24 hours or 8. It's when the driver's notified, they're supposed to stop whatever they're doing and head directly to the collection site. The random alcohol testing can only be done before, during, or after performing a safety-sensitive function. We utilize the computer-generated random selection process called the random.next method. If you have 10 employees, we make a list of 10 employees. Each employee is assigned a number. And then we take that list of 10 numbers, and they're randomly assigned another number, and then the random selection is made from that list. So there's no way we ever know John was number 3 and then he was number 7, so we can pick number 7 because John needs to go or something like that. The random rates are determined on the controlled substance, the test data from the Management Information System, the MIS. The positive rate for controlled substances random testing must stay below the 1% threshold for 2 consecutive calendar years. Federal Motor Carrier recently, I think it was about 4 years ago, they dropped the random testing rate from 50 to 25, and that lasted, I think, for a year, maybe 2, and it automatically was bumped back up to 50% because the random positive rate exceeded the 1%. There's a list of all the DOT agencies and the rates they're at. Currently, it's just Federal Motor Carrier, Federal Transit, and the Coast Guard at 50%. The FRA Mechanical, that's a new one that they added last summer. And since it's a new testing requirement, it is automatically at the 50% and 10% for alcohol. The FRA MO, Maintenance of Way, that had 2 years of under 1%, so that dropped back down to 25. And also this year, Pipeline dropped down to the 25% random testing. Refusal to submit to testing. It's considered a refusal to test if the MRO, the medical review officer, reports that you have verified adulterated or substituted test result. That is something we receive from the lab. They get it in and they test it for adulterants and substitutions. And if it does contain an adulterant, they won't even test it. They'll just consider it a fatal flaw, and it's reported out as a positive. It's also a refusal if you fail to appear for any test within a reasonable time. This would be something along the lines of the random. If you tell the employee to go and he doesn't end up going, and then the next day he's like, oh, I forgot, that is considered a refusal to test by the DOT. If you fail to remain at the testing site until the testing process is completed, is considered a refusal. You fail to provide a specimen as required. You fail to permit the observation or monitoring of a specimen. That would be direct observation for follow-up or return to duty. Also for any test, if the specimen comes back cold or hot, which it does, the collector's instructed or required to take a second specimen, and the second one is always observed. If you fail or decline to take a second test, which would usually what happens when you get a cold specimen. It's also a refusal if you fail to provide a sufficient amount of urine when directed, and it's been determined through a required medical exam that there is no adequate medical explanation for failure. If you fail to undergo a medical exam or evaluation for insufficient amount, or if you fail to cooperate with any part of the testing process. These are all considered refusals to test. The consequences of a DOT positive: at a minimum, an employee who violates any of the regulations or have a refusal, they are not allowed to perform any DOT safety sensitive duty for an employer until they have completed the return to duty process. The return to duty process is, I'll get into it later when we talk about the clearinghouse. Essential to an employer's drug or alcohol testing program requirements are written policy concerning drug and alcohol testing, driver and supervisor education, and scientifically conducted random selection process. So the clearinghouse is, in our field, it's kind of exciting because it's something new to talk about because federal regulations rarely change, but they published the rule in December of 2016. It went into effect January of 2017. They had 3 years to implement the rule and create the database, and that started January 6th of 2020, which it also opened on the 6th of 2020. The clearinghouse it's a database of FMCSA positives, refusals, or other violations of the drug and alcohol testing requirements. It's only FMCSA. It does not contain any other DOT agencies like Pipeline or FAA. Employers are required to query the database on their employees. The clearinghouse will eliminate the previous employer background checks for drug and alcohol violations, and that was this January of 2023. What it does not eliminate as far as background checks, if you hire an employee that maybe was covered under another DOT agency, as in pipeline or something, you would still be required to do the employer background checks, either through email or whatever. What is in a query? A limited query just is when you run a limited query, it will just tell you whether the driver is prohibited or not prohibited. It's just a check of the database to see if there's any information in the database about that person. You're required to have a query run on an employee within the last 365 days, which means you just basically have to run a limited query once a year on all your employees. A full query is information on a driver's drug and alcohol test results. This has to be done on pre-employment, and if something comes back on your limited query that you run annually. All queries must be retained for 3 years. On the limited query, you just need driver's consent. It's just between you and the driver. You can have them fill out a form and say, I consent that you can run my limited query on me yearly. For a full query, it is completely done through the clearinghouse. The way it works is you would run the full query in the clearinghouse. The driver actually has to register in the clearinghouse and give his consent through his registration in the clearinghouse. What's a query cost? They're $1.25 a piece. You can buy as many as you want. They don't expire. They do have options for high volume users, but it was ridiculous. It was like 45 grand or something like that. So if you're running like 40,000 queries a year, that's when it would start paying off you to buy an annual high volume plan. This is right out of the clearinghouse. This is just the information you need to conduct the query. It's just first name, last name, date of birth, CDL number, and state of issuance. Actually, when the clearinghouse started, I ran one on myself, and this is basically the information you get. Again, it just has my driver information, and I have no open violations right up there where it says query result, driver not prohibited. If I was prohibited, it would just say driver prohibited. And if that was on a limited query, I don't remember which one I did. It was a pre-employment, so that was on a full query. Reporting information. Employers are required to report certain things to the clearinghouse, mostly the refusals that we covered that do not concern a positive drug test. Employers must use their DOT numbers. Drivers are identified by their license number and state of issue. The FMCSA will notify the driver anytime anything is added, revised, or removed in the clearinghouse under their name. And the FMCSA must notify driver when information has been released to an employer and specify the reason for release. Employer's responsibilities in the clearinghouse is to run a full query on a pre-employment before the driver would be able to drive, complete an annual limited query on each driver, report any positive alcohol test results, report any refusals to test not requiring MRO determination, report citations involving drug and alcohol in a commercial motor vehicle. They're also required to report negative return to duty test results and report the completion of follow-up testing. We are also registered in the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse allows TPAs to do those things for you. This is basically, besides the company names, which I blocked out, this is basically what we would see in the clearinghouse if your company authorized us to do these things for you. Just we're allowed to report the violations, report return to duty tests, and also conduct queries for you. And then it gives us a balance of how many queries you still have on file with them. And once again, we can only do this if you authorize us through the clearinghouse. You can't just call us and say, hey, can you do this for me? We can't. It won't let us do it. I wanted to cover, clearinghouse has been up for 3 years. These are some of the stats. Drivers, so far, there's been over 3 million drivers that have registered in the clearinghouse. The only time a driver has to register in the clearinghouse is if they have a violation or they seek new employment. Otherwise, if you've never had a violation and you stay at your same job, you'd never have to register for the clearinghouse. There's 443,000 employers have registered, 237,000 owner-operators, 15,500 CTPAs, which is what we are, 2,000 MROs, and almost 4,400 substance abuse professionals. This stat here is how many queries have been completed, and for last year it was 17,634,000. Now we get into the more interesting stuff, and that's the violations. Almost 70,000 violations last year for drugs, and just over 1,500 on the alcohol. You can see total for the last 3 years, there's 182,000 violations. Most of them are positive drug tests. There's still over 25,000 refusals, and then they somehow singled out actual knowledge on somebody's using drugs. And this is just that in a different way, kind of breaks it out into, as far as the drug test refusals and positives, most of them are in pre-employment. For each year, it's 88% were positive drug tests, and the 12% were, the rest of them were refusals to test. It's most of them are pre-employment randoms, not a lot of post-accidents or return to duties and the rest of them. As far as the alcohol, you can see it's mostly random and reasonable suspicion with, quite a few actual knowledges in there. The pre-employment ones, those are more of an IQ test more than anything else. If you know you're going for a drug test, why would you be drinking before you went? But what are the positives? Overwhelmingly, they're marijuana. 101,500 tests so far in the last 3 years. Each year, it's grown, and it will probably just continue to grow. The other one's cocaine. That comes in second, unless you count meth and amphetamine as, they're all amphetamines, so that's, 31,000 there. The oxys and the hydros, those are the prescription painkillers, opioids that they added in 2018. They make up a good chunk of them. And then you get into the opiates, morphine, codeine, 6-AM. 6-AM is a metabolite for heroin. And then PCP and the other two, MDMA and MDA. And this is since January 6th of 2020. There's, again, marijuana is the most positive drug tests we receive are marijuana. This stat is interesting to me because all the drivers out there, there's 166,000 drivers in the clearinghouse that have a violation. Of them, only almost 46,000 of them have completed the return to duty process. So that leaves 120,000 drivers that are still in this limbo state where they are not prohibited to drive. Of those, 91,000 haven't even started the return to duty process. In the clearinghouse, when you have a positive drug test, the driver, if he doesn't have an account already, is required to create a clearinghouse account, and then they're required to send a consent request to the SAP through the clearinghouse. Once the SAP accepts it, then the driver is instructed, the driver meets with the SAP over phone or video conference, I think they are allowing to do nowadays. And the SAP will recommend treatment or education. And at that point, once the driver completes that to the SAP's, until the SAP is satisfied with it, the SAP will put into the clearinghouse that they're eligible for a return to duty test. And then once that driver takes the return to duty test, the employer gets a negative result. The employer is required to put that negative result into the clearinghouse. And at that point, the driver can return to a safety sensitive function. Spoke a little bit about the opioids they added in 2018. That's hydrocodone, hydromorphone, oxycodone, and oxymorphone. Those were added in 2018. This is the DOT drug test panel and screening levels. Most of it doesn't mean anything. So if you see the screens are higher than the confirmations, that's typically because they screen for a multitude of drug test or drug analytes. And then when they do the confirmation testing, they're looking for a certain analyte or metabolite. The 4 drugs that the DOT added in 2018 are all used as pain prescriptions, and they're all considered synthetic opioids. They're all Schedule II drugs. We get a lot of lab positive test results where the employee has a valid prescription, and the test result is reported to the employer as a negative once they show us that prescription. But we also have the issue with a notice of significant risk. If the MRO feels that this driver is not safe to be taking these opioids or any prescription drug, he can issue a notice of significant risk that the employee then must contact his physician and either get something stating he's okay to drive on these, or the physician may switch him to something else that would make it okay for him to drive. Again, the MRO will provide the employee with up to 5 business days to either produce a letter to the prescription or have the physician contact the MRO to determine if either the medication could be changed to one that does not pose a significant safety risk. Want to talk a little bit about marijuana today. In 2020, there were 11 states plus Washington, D.C. that had legalized marijuana, and 33 states at that time had legalized medical marijuana. None of these actions have changed federal law, which prohibits the use, possession, delivery, and growing of marijuana. This is a map from 2020, and it shows basically, it just shows the states that have the legalized and medical marijuana. This is a map from 2022. So there's a lot more states that allow it, and actually there's only 4 states there that where marijuana in any form is still illegal. Michigan passed legalized marijuana in 2018. Laura had until December of 2019 to begin accepting applications for stores and retailers. The recreational medical marijuana in the bill that was passed, it allows individuals 21 and older to purchase, possess, and use. They can have up to 12 plants only for personal consumption. It imposed a 10-ounce limit that you can keep at your home, and required at any amount over 2.5 ounces be secured in locked containers. It created a state licensing system for marijuana businesses and allow municipalities to ban or restrict them if they chose. It permits the retail sales of marijuana and edibles subject to a 10% excise tax. The tax is dedicated to implementation costs, clinical trials, schools, roads, and municipalities where marijuana businesses are located. It changed several current violations from crimes to civil infractions, and it allows you to gift up to 2.5 ounces. Michigan, I haven't seen the stats for 2022 yet. In 2021, Michigan collected $175 million on that 10% excise tax. Each municipality received $56,000 per dispensary. Ann Arbor came in at number 1 with the most dispensaries, 24. They received $1,344,000 in the tax, and based on their population, that was 1 dispensary per 5,000 residents. 2 was a little bit of a shocker to me, Bay City. 22 dispensaries, 33,000 residents, $1.2 million in taxes, and 1 dispensary for every 1,500 residents. Big Rapids and Grand Rapids tied for 6 with 12 dispensaries each. These stats are directly out of our database on the drug tests that we perform and process. Thought it was interesting. If you look between the middle column, there is the lab percentage. So that's the percentage of tests that come back to us from the lab with a lab positive test. In 2017, it was 2.64%, and then 2018, it jumped to 3.22. That was the year they added the synthetic opioids. In 2019, it grew a little bit more, and then COVID, it dropped down to 2.75. During COVID, DOT basically came out and said you don't have to do random drug testing, just document. Clinics weren't open. It was a real pain. But if you see it's growing, with all the marijuana that's out there now, we're back up to 3.75% on the lab positive. Of those percentages, that's what we receive, we process, we get prescriptions, and on the far right, that's the actual percentage of positive test results that we send out to employers. So last year we came in at 2.22% of all the drug tests we did were positive. The medical marijuana, or the Recreational Medical Marijuana Act that Michigan enacted, did not require an employer to permit or accommodate conduct otherwise allowed by that. It doesn't prohibit the employer from disciplining an employee for violation of a workplace drug policy or for working while under the influence of marijuana. I always wondered why in Michigan marijuana was spelled with an H, so I had to go look it up. And it had to do something with when Michigan first started making marijuana laws, they thought it sounded more dangerous if you had an H in there because it was coming from south of the border. So all of Michigan's marijuana laws have an H in it because it was marijuana instead of marijuana. Employers are protected under this act. It does not prevent an employer from refusing to hire, discharge, or discipline, otherwise taking an adverse employment action against a person with respect to hire, tenure, terms, conditions, or privileges of employment because of that person's violation of the workplace drug policy or because that person was working while under the influence of marijuana. The drug-free workplace, many employers have also implemented drug-free workplace policies that mirror the DOT. They are in place under company authority, and recent legislation does not require an employer to permit marijuana use or accommodate it in the workplace. In addition, it does not allow an employee to be under the influence of marijuana in the workplace. As a result, an employer may continue to test for marijuana prior to hiring and may refuse to hire someone who tests positive. Employers may also continue to take disciplinary action up to and or including termination of someone who violates a workplace policy. We have companies that go either way. Within the last year, we've probably got 6 to 8 companies that don't want to test for marijuana at all. This is all non-DOT. DOT, you still have to test for it. We also have companies that say, Well, we have companies that don't want to test for marijuana, so that's considered a 4-panel test instead of a 5-panel. The 4-panel test actually costs more for us to have the lab run that test than to run a 5-panel with marijuana, only because it's something freakish, not standard. So they charge you more to run a test on less drugs. And then we also have companies that will test for marijuana, but they'll allow their employees to have a certain level of it. If it's under positive marijuana test is the level of 15 nanograms per milliliter. We have companies that say, well, if you keep it below 40, we'll allow you to continue working for us and just go with it that way. Cannabis sativa marijuana is cultivated for the production of THC. It has high concentrations of THC, and they vary between 5 and 30%. Dr. Budnick, in the first days when Colorado was one of the first states, he was out there and he went into one of the dispensaries, and he basically walked in and told them what he did, and he was there to learn on it. And some guy pulled him into the back rooms and showed him something that he had was like 42% THC or something like that. But I think it's even gotten stronger over the last few years. It's intoxicating, it's legal only in certain states, and it's available only from licensed dispensaries. Hemp, it's cultivated for fiber, clothing, and construction. To be considered hemp, it has to contain less than 0.3% of THC. It's got high levels of CBD, non-intoxicating, federally legal, and unregulated by the FDA. It's available online or in your local stores. CBD, cannabidiol, it's one of 113 identified cannabinoids. The marijuana screen level for marijuana is 50 nanograms. So when the lab screens a test for marijuana, there's 113 different cannabinoids out there. If there's more than 50 of any of those cannabinoids, it will test positive in the screening. And then when it goes to the confirmation level, they are looking just for delta-9 THC-A. And if that's above the 15 nanograms per milliliter, then it ends up being a positive drug test. A drug test for someone using CBD, it will test positive during the screening, but upon the confirmation, it may or may not test positive depending on the THC concentration. CBD oil and gummies and whatever they're selling these days. 100% CBD products will not show in a drug test confirmation. It'll show positive in the screening again, and when they look for the THC, it won't be there because it's 100% CBD. CBD is not regulated, so there's no way of knowing what's really in it. Hemp-based CBD products often contain trace amounts of THC. Again, to be considered a hemp, it's 0.3% or less. And we have had several positive tests due to the concentration over time. The weird thing with marijuana and THC is it's not water soluble, it's fat soluble, so it stays in your body longer. Dr. Budnick has actually talked to people that it's been in their body for 40 days after they've used it, a heavy user who all of a sudden quits. And so over time, you're taking that CBD and it's got this minuscule amount of THC. Well, that's building in your body constantly every time you take it. So eventually, I actually had a friend that was switching jobs, and he was a truck driver, and he took a drug. He was using some CBD he had some back issues, and he was using CBD and went in for his pre-employment, passed his test. Month later, 2 months later, he got called out for random, passed it. 6 months later, he got called out for another random. He tested positive. It was very low. It was like 18 nanograms per milliliter. But over time, that does build up in your system. Oral fluid testing, Health and Human Services, 2019 guidance rule went into effect in 2020. DOT published a notice of proposed rulemaking in February of 2022. Implementation into oral fluid testing will involve certifying the labs training the medical review officer, and training the medical review officer would just include knowing what the levels mean on saliva testing. The other thing they need to do is revise the CCF, or the custody and control form, and also develop ways to limit cheating. Alternating between oral fluid and urine tests will be permitted to supervise potential cheaters. This is a copy, or the top half of a custody and control form. And if you look halfway down under step 2, it says urine, and then they have already added the oral fluid testing. So oral fluid testing is coming. It's probably going to be another year before they actually allow it. Hair testing, on the other hand, they passed a bill in 2015. Health and Human Services spent 3.5 years dealing with unresolved scientific issues. What I believe that was is, so there's basically 2 or 3 labs that do hair testing. One of them has a superior scientific way of washing the hair before they test it, and they don't want to give up any trade secrets. Health and Human Services wants to go with their way, but they don't want to tell anybody else how to do it because it's theirs. It's proprietary. But currently it's at the OMB, and this slide says general consensus is they will release it sometime this year. I can't say that anymore. I've been saying that for 6 or 7 years now. Just recently, there's about 100 trucking companies that actually do hair testing along with urine testing that petitioned the DOT to allow them to use just the hair testing, and they told them no on that. So hair testing, it may come, it may not, but it will probably still be a while. Why all the different reasons? Well, there's different detection windows. For hair testing, it's 1 to 100 days. Urine testing is 1 to 3 days. I got the asterisks in there because marijuana does stay in your system a lot longer and can be up to 40. Saliva testing is 1 to 36 hours. The collection method, hair and saliva are both observed. Urine is not observed in general, but is observed on return to duty follow-ups and direct observations. The cost of hair testing is about twice as much as urine, and saliva testing, I believe it will be somewhere in between there. With saliva testing, when we do a urine test, the labs provide everything you need, the cups, the shipping, all that. It's all built into the price. When you get into saliva testing, you're forced to buy the swabs, and whether you use them or not, you're still buying them. And they do expire, and you do have to do some quality control with them. The best use, we believe the best use for hair would be pre-employment or random testing. For urine, again, both pre-employment, random testing. Saliva, we think, is a good use for post-accident and reasonable suspicion testing. And also, you could go return to duty or follow-up testing with either urine or saliva, but you wouldn't want to do that with hair because you'd be going too far back and it'd probably still test positive for a while. Fentanyl, big drug in the news. Drug Testing Board has forwarded a recommendation to the Health and Human Services Secretary that they add fentanyl to the list of drugs for federal and safety sensitive workers. Secretary has 180 days to decide whether to approve the board's recommendation. I don't think that they can even move fast enough to get fentanyl added. I also believe that fentanyl is deadly enough that I don't know how many people are actually using it and, being a truck driver or something like that. So, fentanyl, you can't hardly even touch it without people dying. So I don't know if they will actually add that to the drug test panel or not. That's all I had today. I'm sorry if I kind of ran through that quickly. Everybody wants to go home, I know that. Does anybody have any questions for me on anything drug related? Yes.
What type of services do you actually provide?
Okay, so we're a third-party administrator. We have a model program that we could provide for your company. Uh, it's uh, it's a book. It's about that thick. It covers all the regulations, has all the forms you need, everything for that. We also have random pools. We would do the random selections. You can go anywhere to get anywhere that's certified to get the drug test collected. It would just go through our lab and come back through our medical review officer, and then the results are sent to you through us.
Do you have a price list?
Yes, sure.
And I gotta ask you about random testing. And you may have covered that, but I lost it somewhere.
Okay,
How, I mean, we're all small companies.
right.
Some of us have 30 drivers.
Okay, yeah,
Okay, so we may have anywhere from 4 to maybe 10.
yep.
How frequently what type of pool do they go in and how frequent
Okay.
are they pulled?
All right, that's more okay. So you have less than 10 drivers. We have a consortium pool. We call it our small pool. Currently, there's about 750 companies in it. There's roughly 2,400 drivers in it. With our consortium pool, we draw quarterly, once a quarter, and then you're either selected. Your company might not have anybody selected, but the pool as a whole is within the federal regulations of testing at 50%. For that, we charge, we just had to raise the price. I believe it's $17 per person per quarter. And then that also covers your collection fee. So when you go to a collection site, and let's say you're on your own pool, we charge $47 for the drug test. And then the collection site is going to charge you anywhere from $20 to $40 for them to collect it.
So what's the fee that you're charging?
We're charging for the lab and to process the lab result.
Okay, all right.
So with our small pools, because you may get selected every quarter, we always have at least one person selected every quarter for a year. We just charge a flat $17. So if you're selected, you pay the $17 and that's it. If you're not selected, you pay the $17 and that's it.
Do you serve southeastern Michigan?
We serve all over the country. Again, you can use any collection site that's DOT certified if you fall under DOT. And they would just bill us directly, usually for the collection site. We also use Bud with Crossroads Testing. He's an on-site collector. You could partner with him and he would come right out and test whoever you had selected.
Yeah, the current problem we have, and the company was good for a long time, and all of a sudden, it's like every month, one of our guys are going. Every month. So 12 months a year, I'm sending somebody.
Yeah. No, we do it quarterly, and it's the beginning of the quarter. We send you a report, tell you who's select, list your drivers, and then
So there will be 4 people. If it's quarterly,
there's 4 draws.
or 4 draws.
Yep.
So 4 times.
4 times a
So I
year.
can figure 4 of those expenses a year.
Yes.
Definitely want your information.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you, and everybody drive safe on their way home. Thank you.